Welcome to Southgate Light Railway, a small 32mm gauge garden railway in North Yorkshire.
I'm Nikki and this is Rob, and we're going to give you a bit of a tour round and you'll see some trains running.
The railway started in 2014. Over the winter period, the rear fence at our garden had blown down, so we decided to replace it with a brick wall. A stone wall was built on the inside of this, suitably gapped to allow the railway to run across the top. The idea was for the line to run across the wall into the shed and it for it to be a comfortable height to steam up in. The bottom of the wall was filled with rubble, and concrete flags were stood up on this rubble so that the track base was sat directly on them, meaning that the track base couldn't sink into the infill of the wall over time. Here you can see the concrete flags stood up that the track base will then be poured on top of. A waterfall was installed in the corner, mainly to break up the wall but also to provide a feature for the railway to run across. The line splits into two and has a 1 in 50 slope on both the up and down legs. This is to allow the track to pass each other and head into the shed at two different levels. So boarding was installed in the shed for these levels, with the top one being the steam up area and the bottom one being a loop to return back up the line. The track outside is onto concrete base, but tile adhesive is laid in ridges. This allows it to be sanded down so the track bed is nice and level and doesn't have any sharp edges that cause issues with derailing. Metal bridges were built for the line. These were crudely put together with stick welding, but the rails themselves are actually welded onto the bridge. This is so that when the loco runs over it and the stock, it reverberates through the bridge and gives a nice sound. A number of bridges had to be constructed, this one being a lift out for access behind the shed. A retaining wall was built using small stones created by taking thin slabs of stone saw them into sections and then using a chisel to cut them into faced blocks, which were then walled up. The base of the garden has been flagged, but with gravel around the outside so that we don't have to deal with the excess water that flagging creates. This creates a lovely area to sit out, have a barbecue and watch the trains go by at eye level. The railway was officially opened in 2015, although already we had plans for an extension. The loop extension that sits on our driveway was started at the end of this year and was to provide a continuous run in a dog bone layout. It's built with Philcris ladder system and is bent round formers in these photos and then topped with the Philcris running boards. It was then cut so it could be installed in two pieces and removed so that we could get our cars on the drive. However, we found now that we can fit both cars with it up, so it tends to stay up all year round. It was edged again in Philcris board, and then later fencing was added for protection. Here you can see it was integrated into the Stonyholme station. In 2017, we also created a steam up area outside the front of the shed. This was for our Yorkshire group members to steam up on open days and provides an area for both steaming up and cooling down. It comes out off the top level of the line, which is also the steam up area inside the shed. Fencing was also added in this year and has been achieved by drilling holes into the stone wall at an angle and then having bent rail come out and up. It's at a height where you can still reach across to couple up your stock and is also strong enough that any stock that runs into it or tries to fall over can't do. In 2020, a very small extension has been made. There was an area of the shed that wasn't being utilised very well, so a siding was added in the top steam up area. It's only big enough to hold one loco, but it has proved quite useful. We've also managed to fit some more buildings into the shed. Now we could have a whole different video on buildings, as over the years we have done quite a lot of work on them, but we'll leave it out of this video this year.
Let's start by joining the crew of Ajax for a morning track inspection.
This is Charles, a 2012 Roundhouse model. that has been lined by Matt Acton. It's, as far as I know, the only one with the lining it's got, because we based it off the real loco in the Penryn Museum, so the inside of the cab is split half and half cream and brown, like the real one. It has various additions that are SLR models products. With us running SLR models, a lot of our locos have items on that we've developed for us and then progressed to being sale items. So mainly lamps on almost all locos. This one has the brand new buffers. Aside from that, it has a DJB whistle, which has then been modified to have a drain on the whistle. It has tallow cocks on the front of the cylinders, along with silver discs to make them look a bit more realistic. It's had all the springs and details painted red on the sides. The figure is originally a Busybodies figure, which is supposed to look like me. I'll let you be the judge of that one. This is Clydesdale. She is a roundhouse fowler. Joined us in 2017. It has had some modifications before we got it, and we have made some modifications both to improve the running and the look of the loco since we got it. We had a few issues when it came to us with being able to pull load. It took us quite a long time to work out that this loco is back end heavy and all the driving is at the front, which means it has no traction when you put a lot of load on it. The way we've solved that is by adding two quite big chunks of brass underneath the smoke box, which has massively improved its pulling power. I've added curtain sides rolled up, which are based on what the originals would have had. I've added the generator that sits at the back of the boiler. We made the front lamp work. The lamp is not original, but the lamp was already on it when it came to us. I've added pipe work on the Westinghouse pump, which again, the Westinghouse pump was there before it came to us, just with no pipe work. I've also added a water top-up valve, which is hidden underneath the dome, so you can't see it, but it is there. That allows you to refill the gas before you set off running, so you can have a longer run.
This is Ntinyana. It's a Peter Angus built locomotive, built in 1985. It's a Avonside Heisler type locomotive with a V-twin engine. The real locomotive was supplied to an estate in South Africa, and this model was built from a works photo that Peter Angus was able to get hold of, but it was only a photo from one side of the locomotive, so he had to work the dimensions off the size of the doorway and work everything else out from that, but he didn't have a width. He has built numerous other newer locomotives of the model the same, and the dimensions of this original one are pretty close, so he was quite accurate with his dimensions. When we got the locomotive, it hadn't run for a number of years. It came off a friend of mine, and so when we got it, we managed to get it working, but we soon noticed that the pistons needed some attention. So another friend of ours helped us to replace the pistons, and since then it's been running extremely well. With it being a geared locomotive with a central drive shaft, it is manual control, but you can get it to run round at quite a steady pace, and it will go over hills and bumps and bits like that quite well. It's quite unique in the design with the V-twin engine, with each piston at each side being actual functional, whereas a number of other Peter Angus locomotives used a Caton type engine, or the Caton itself hidden underneath, and then fake the cylinders on top, whereas both these ones are the real deal. The model does look a little bit tired now, but the actual paintwork and the lining is in very good condition. We even have the colour, thanks to Peter writing it on the box, because it is still living in its original 1985 box. We are hoping to get this restored rather than repainted either this year or next, now that we've got it functioning fairly well. You can actually find this locomotive in Peter Angus's book. It's on page 49 and the locomotive is number 37. This is Sir Baldrick. It was built by myself and completed in 2019. It's a Lady Anne chassis, so kit built chassis, with a Baldrick XT bodywork, so that's from Mike's Models, and with a Riverdale coal-fired boiler, so that's the Amy boiler that suits the Lady Anne chassis. I soon realised when I got the body, because I bought that sort of semi-complete, that when I sat it next to Illingworth, our other Lady Anne locomotive, that the proportions were pretty close, and I felt I could make it work. And having already built one Riverdale coal-fired loco Yvonne, I wanted to build a second but on the larger boiler, which is what it's based off, so it had to be a Lady Anne chassis. So there was a lot of modification to get it to all fit, and I wanted certain things with this loco that I'd learnt from Yvonne. So one of the main ones being I wanted the blower to be on radio control. I find that while you're in and around at home it's not so bad, but when you're out running with others on a weekend, one of the Yorkshire events, some of our gas-fired friends, let's say, like to run out of gas in front of you, and that causes you a problem if you can't get to your loco, because although it's radio control, to stop it you have to basically get across the garden rather quickly up said bank and turn the blower on. So having it on radio control means that I can stop, put the blower on, and as long as I've got plenty of water and coal, you can just wait for the gas one to be yanked out of the way, and then continue on your way for the next hour or so. The locomotive runs extremely well, compared to Yvonne that I've had numerous problems with. So Baldrick has just ran beautifully from the start with very few issues. It's a very tame locomotive, it's not too jumpy, it likes to run smoothly. Again, I'd learnt a number of lessons from building the Yvonne locomotive as to how loose the chassis should be, which has helped with running it. I can easily get 2 or 3 hours even out of it. It hardly uses much water and coal, and it's an absolute pleasure to run. A build log for Sir Baldrick has been published in the November issue of the 2019 16mm Association magazine, also known as the SMT. It shows the issues I had with fitting the bodywork onto the chassis and the boiler, and all the extra detail that went into it, such as the chimney and lamps details that I put into this locomotive, because one of the key aims with it was to make sure it didn't look like another Lady Anne. Speaking of which, it's another Lady Anne, although technically this is a Silver Lady. This is Illingworth. It was new from Roundhouse in 2011 to myself. One of the interesting things about this locomotive is it's got 2 names. It's called Illingworth, and that's what I always know it as, but it's got Mitchell on this side. Now, anybody that knows anything about MkII and Bolton Abbey Steam Railway will know that there's also an Illingworth there, and it's also got 2 names, although interestingly it's going to be renamed very soon. The whole point of having 2 names on the locomotive was because in its real life days, back in the Valley Light Railway, it ran over the years under the 2 names, one of Illingworth and one of Mitchell. And when the locomotive was restored, they put a name on each side so that people can have a photo of each of the names. Now, the locomotive doesn't look anything like this, but it was inspiration to set the lining and the names based off it. A number of additions have been added to the locomotive over the years, including a DJB resonator whistle and running boards from Loco Works. It doesn't get run as much as it maybe used to, because the coal-fired locos have mainly taken over, but with a bit of TLC needed at the minute, it could be run, and when it does run, it runs extremely well.
This is Yvonne. It's a Roundhouse Billy chassis and body kit, combined with a Riverdale coal-fired boiler. It was built by myself in 2016 and was the first steam locomotive I'd put together. It has a George tender and a number of additions from Loco Works. Its radio control and the a blower was converted to radio control just after Sir Baldrick was built, and that was proved to be a success on that model, so I applied it to this one. It's currently not running due to a running gear issue, so it's in the SLR workshop, undergoing some maintenance and to look at the chassis. Unfortunately, when I built the model, with it being my first one, there was a number of things I maybe didn't get quite right, and I learned a lot from building the second one, which was Sir Baldrick.
So now we're going to look at our diesel stock. So we have James, which is our first locomotive that came to the SLR. So this is after Illingworth, but the SLR didn't exist when Illingworth came to the railway. James was the first locomotive purchased specifically for this railway. It came from the notorious place eBay, and it was a very bright blue with orange outlining. It stood out, it's fair to say. And as you'll probably notice with all of our diesel stock, they are grubby diesels. That is the point of them. So we had to calm that colour down. So it was very quickly repainted in this very dark blue and weathered. In fact, the driver can hardly see out, and yes, there is a driver in there somewhere. It's proven to be a very reliable locomotive. It does have an Mtronic sound unit in it, which is common across a lot of people's locos now, and it sounds really good, nice and loud. We have it loud whenever it shows. The horn particularly is loud. It really does deafen us, so it's to be used mainly to wake people up. Number 3 was built at the end of 2014, so after James, when that was purchased in 2014, and was finished in very early 2015. This is a Houston Gate Loco Works chassis and body, and has quite a lot packed into it. So both James and number 3 are lithium powered with Deltang radio control, and both also have the Mtronics sound unit. Thing in this little loco is a very tight squeeze, but with this one we've gone with the small canal boat sound, if I remember right, and it really does suit a little loco. It sounds great. So number 3 is mainly used just for moving around a few of the smaller trucks on the railway, whereas James can move around most of the stock that we have, including a few of the steam locomotives. So this is Goliath, our big red diesel, and this is Ajax. Now both these diesels are 3D printed models, but on a metal chassis. Both produced by myself and printed by ourselves. We first started getting into 3D printing back in 2016, and the reason I built such a big loco to start with was basically to test the printers and myself to make the most complex design possible and then see whether I could actually finish it. So Goliath was finished in 2017, although over the next few years I've been adding little bits because I was never quite happy with the finished look of it. And of course it's also been weathered since it was finished, because when it's finished it was really quite bright and red and big, so it's been toned down somewhat. So Goliath is based off a MkII sugarcane mill in Australia. It is shortened somewhat from the design of that locomotive, because to fit round the SLR curves, which we are 30-inch radius, I had to first make a template of the chassis and the bogies and work out what could fit, and then fit the design around that. So it only just goes round our line. Goliath runs on 2 Essel powered bogies, and it's got enough power to recover our coal-fired locos, which was its original design. It's got a brass chassis that was bent, and then brass weights added to that again, and some lead weights about it as well, just to add as much weight as possible, because when you do have a 3D printed loco, they are quite light. Both locomotives run on lithium-ion batteries, so they have really good lifespans, and it keeps the power to the motors really constant as well. Goliath has an Mtronix sound unit, which is the large diesel, if I remember right, and Ajax has a sound unit that I've been playing about with on my own, of programming it as well. So this is Ajax. It was started in 2018, and despite its size, it actually took far longer than Goliath. It was only actually completed in 2020, although there was a sort of finished version in 2018 that I took to the Peterborough show. In fact, I was actually screwing the bonnet on in the hotel room before Peterborough show with the paint still wet, which is probably why a second version was needed. This version that's completed now is quite a bit bigger. So the proportions of this loco, in fact the whole design of it, are based off a few photos I found online of a locomotive in Indonesia from a sugarcane railway. So there's no dimensions I got from it, but I got rough ones off the photos. Again, it's slightly different proportions because I needed to make it fit around the chassis I used, which is a Roundhouse 040 chassis, and I needed it to fit electronics in. One of the aims with this locomotive is to make sure that you couldn't see how it worked. So most of the time you have a big bonnet like in Goliath, and you pack it full of batteries, electronics, wires, stuff it all in there and screw it down. With Ajax, it has an open side. You can actually see into the Duke's engine bay, and this also was the reason for building a V2. So one of my friends thought it was a great suggestion to point out that the flywheel didn't turn in version 1. And of course I'd set myself up for that, having an open-sided engine cover, and so that started V2. So with V2 it was made wider, I was able to include a working flywheel which is in sync with the sound unit that's inside there, and also include a third lithium-ion battery which is hidden in the air tank at the side. The original two hidden in 2 cylinders of the engine. All the rest of the electronics are hidden underneath the chassis, which makes for quite an interesting loco when it's going round, when you can't see how it works, but it lasts for so long. It's radio control, sound, and you've got the working flywheel as well in there. So this is Lister Mark II. It's the latest locomotive to have come out of the SLR works, let's say. It was only completed a few months ago. As you can see, compared to Goliath, it's absolutely tiny. Obviously it's based off a Lister locomotive, and what was very helpful is we've actually just got one just down the road, about 10 minutes walk. So we could take all the dimensions, photos and everything off that and build it based off that. We did have a first Lister Mark I, which we bought off another Yorkshire member, and we were able to squeeze radio control and sound into it, which a lot of people were impressed with. But once again, like the Ajax story, somebody had the cheek to suggest to me that the man didn't look where he was going. So that got the brain whirring, and I thought, do you know what, I'm going to build a second one, and not only is the man's head going to move, I'm going to improve the sound, and I'm going to make it a more realistic size. So this is actually an IP kit, but it's narrowed. So the IP kit starts at 65mm and this is 53. To actually make it real scale, it'd have to be 45mm, but you start to run into problems with the wheel size, because obviously our wheels don't scale down exactly. So this lister does include the working man's head, which you'll see in the footage, and sound, and also includes our SLR models 3D printed engine for extra detail. I will be publishing, I hope, in the 16mm Association magazine, a build log for this locomotive as well, because I think it will interest quite a few people as to how it's all packed into such a small space. And I'm a bit amazed myself, really, that it's actually possible. One of the amazing things we found about this locomotive compared to version 1 was how much it can pull. Now, I designed into it the fact that it's four-wheel drive using two worm drives to each axle, whereas the original Lister Mark 1 had a sort of belt rubber band system, but as soon as it saw a hair, it slipped and didn't work. This locomotive can actually pull a surprising amount behind it. Again, because it had some 3D printed parts, we had to add weight, and this is actually 350 grams compared to the 450 of the Mark 1, but it can pull far more. Just that extra traction, the power that the lithium battery can deliver as well. It's a surprising little workhorse of the railway, and can really shock a few people when they see it running around the line up a hill with the weight that it's got behind it.
Thank you.